hello, very good morning to you all. I'll just wait for some of you to take your seats. Quite a crowded room, actually, which is great news. We're very pleased about that. Everybody happy? Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Felicity Barr, and on behalf of the World Heart Federation and the National Heart Foundation of Australia, I am delighted to welcome you to this session, which is Addressing Obesity to Reduce the Global Burden of Cardiovascular Disease. Thank you for joining us on what I think we all agree is an in-depth look at this increasingly urgent global health challenge. Around the world, obesity is one of the fastest growing drivers of cardiovascular disease. It contributes to earlier onset of CVD, rising levels of multimorbidity, and escalating pressure on health systems right across every region and every income setting. But despite this, obesity is too often insufficiently addressed within cardiovascular prevention and treatment strategies. Policy is fragmented across clinical care, public health, and broader social factors. Now, the National Heart Foundation of Australia will today be launching its clinical consensus statement on obesity and cardiovascular disease, providing evidence-based, practical guidance for health professionals. And we have, I'm delighted to say, a panel of experts to give us their views on the way forward. But first, with their opening thoughts, we're going to welcome Jagat Narula, President of the World Heart Federation, and David Lloyd, CEO of the National Heart Foundation of Australia. And I think, Jagat, you're going to be first up to the podium. Please welcome Jagat.
Thank you, Felicity. Good morning. It is my great honor to welcome you all on behalf of the World Heart Federation to this side event of the 79th World Health Assembly, addressing obesity to reduce the global burden of cardiovascular diseases. I want to begin by thanking our co-hosts, the National Heart Foundation of Australia, whose leadership has made this event possible, and our distinguished panel, and each of you in this room for choosing to begin your morning at the assembly with us. The fact that this hall is full at this hour on this topic is in itself a measure of how decisively the global health conversation is shifting. We are gathered to confront two epidemics that the world is no longer entitled to treat as separate. The first is cardiovascular disease, still the leading cause of death and of premature mortality on every continent, claiming more than 20 million lives every year. The second is obesity, once dismissed as a problem of affluent societies, now a defining global crisis. Today, more than 1 billion people are living with obesity. 2.5 billion adults, close to half of the world's adult population, carry excess body weight. Childhood and adolescent obesity have quadrupled since 1990, and for the first time in the human history, in 2022, more children and adolescents around the world were affected by obesity than by underweight. These two epidemics are not parallel, they are convergent, and cardiovascular health is where they meet. Each year, high body mass index is now estimated to drive more than 2.5 million cardiovascular deaths, a figure that has more than doubled over the past 3 decades, and that is rising fastest in the very low and middle income countries with the least capacity to absorb it. Behind each of these numbers is a person, a parent struggling to remain well enough to raise a child, an adolescent already on the path toward a heart attack at the age of 40, a family carrying the financial and emotional weight of a chronic disease that the world had every opportunity to prevent. Let me state plainly what the science has settled and what must therefore guide our policies. Obesity is not a moral failing. It is not the consequence of weak character or of insufficient willpower. As the World Heart Report 2025 made it unambiguous, obesity is a complex, chronic, multifactorial disease shaped by biology, by the food environment, by the built environment, by social and economic inequities, and very powerfully by the commercial determinants of health. The global marketing of the ultra processed foods, sugar sweetened beverages, and engineered hyper palatable products that the human metabolism did not evolve to defend itself against. And the consequences of that disease are profoundly cardiovascular. Excess adipose tissue is not inert. It is an active endocrine organ that drives hypertension, dyslipidemia, insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, atrial fibrillation, ischemic heart disease, heart failure, particularly the one with preserved ejection fraction, chronic kidney disease, and MASLD. These are no longer separate diagnoses. They constitute the cardiovascular kidney metabolic syndrome. They share a common biology, they share a common trajectory, and they deserve a common response. For the first time in our professional lifetime, we also have the tools to interrupt that trajectory at scale. The last 3 years have transformed what is clinically feasible. Incretin-based therapies, the GLPs and the dual GLP and GIP-1 receptor agonists have produced sustained weight reduction previously achievable only by surgery. More importantly, the SELECT trial had demonstrated a 20% reduction in the major adverse cardiovascular events in people living with obesity and established cardiovascular disease in the absence of diabetes. The STEP heart failure with preserved ejection fraction and flow programs have extended that benefits into the HFpEF and into the chronic kidney disease. But let us be honest with each other. These therapies are today available almost entirely to those who can afford them, in the countries that can supply them. If we permit this revolution to remain to the privileged ones, we will widen, not narrow, the global cardiovascular gap. The equitable pricing, voluntary licensing, generic and biosimilar pathways, inclusion in essential medicine list, and integration into the primary care must be on the Assembly's agenda. Innovation that does not reach the patient is innovation that has failed. And medicines alone, however transformative, will never be sufficient. We will not pharmacologically treat our way out of an epidemic that is being manufactured upstream. Reducing obesity at population scale demands that we change the environment in which choices are made. Front of pack warning labels that actually work. Restrictions on the marketing of unhealthy foods to children. Meaningful fiscal measures on sugar sweetened beverages and ultra processed foods. Reformulation on the food supply, the elimination of the industrial trans fats, school food standards that protect children rather than monetize them, and urban environments that make the physically active life possible for the billions for whom it is currently not. These are not radical proposals, they are WHO best buys. They work, they save lives, they save money. They have been adapted with measurable success from Mexico to Chile to the United Kingdom and beyond. What is missing is not evidence. What is missing is political courage in the face of industries whose interests are very different from ours. For long, obesity has sat awkwardly at the periphery of the cardiovascular disease prevention, between clinical specialties, between ministries, between programs, clinical care, nutrition policy, urban planning, education, and commercial regulation have operated in silos, while people living with the obesity have continued to encounter stigma in our clinics and barriers to the evidence-based care. That must end. Obesity must move to the center of our cardiovascular policies, our cardiovascular guidelines, our cardiovascular workforce training, and our cardiovascular advocacy, which is precisely why the launch we mark together this morning matters. It is my privilege to recognize the clinical consensus statement on obesity and cardiovascular diseases of the National Heart Foundation of Australia, released today at the Assembly. It recognizes obesity as a chronic systemic condition with cardiovascular consequences and provides clinicians with practical, evidence based guidance spanning nutrition, physical activity, pharmacotherapy, bariatric and metabolic surgeries, and long term multidisciplinary person centered care. It is exactly the kind of national clinical leadership the world urgently requires. Global evidence translated into something a primary care physician in Sydney or in Sao Paulo or in Nairobi can use on a Monday morning. This World Heart Federation stands fully behind the work and behind every country that follows these guidelines. Our position is unequivocal. If we are serious about reducing the global burden of heart diseases, stroke, diabetes, and kidney failure, we cannot continue to treat obesity as a separate problem. We must embed obesity prevention and treatment into our cardiovascular strategies. We must guarantee equitable access to effective therapies, old and new. We must confront weight stigma, including within our own profession. We must regulate the commercial determinants of the disease with the same seriousness that the world once brought to tobacco. And we must build food, school, and urban environments where the healthy choice is the default and the easy one. No single sector, no single institution, no single country can do this alone. International collaboration across ministries, across professions, across regions, across income groups is the only currency that would work. I hope today's discussion will sharpen that collaboration. I hope it will accelerate stronger policies, stronger clinical leadership, and stronger advocacy at every level, from this assembly to the bedside. A billion people living with obesity, 2.5 million dying from the cardiovascular consequences each year, and a generation of the children whose cardiovascular destiny is being shaped now. That is not a trajectory we can hand to the next World Health Assembly. We have the science, we are gaining the tools. What we need is the will. Thank you once again for being here this morning. I look forward to rich and frank discussion. Thank you. And David live now.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out in this wonderful Swiss weather. Very much appreciate you all being here. My name's David Lloyd. I'm CEO of the National Heart Foundation of Australia, and I have the honour also to serve on the board of the World Heart Federation. Jagat, you've summed everything up beautifully, and I only have one thing to add, if I may, and that is to say that I think this is an absolutely beautiful example of the World Heart Federation and the National Heart Foundation of Australia as one of its most enthusiastic and I hope most engaged members, each doing what we do best. In 2025, the World Heart Federation issued a call to arms, as it does every year with the launch of its World Health Report, launched a call to arms on the issue of obesity. And that issue having been identified, the National Heart Foundation of Australia picked up the challenge and worked with experts from around the country, from the truly vast range and number of disciplines that are relevant to this issue, and tried to create something which was useful, practical, and evidence-based for people to use on this issue. So what we're launching today is a practical clinical consensus statement that responds to that World Heart Federation call to arms of last year, and that we hope quickly becomes a useful template, not just in Australia, but internationally, for ways in which that call can be responded to, a basis perhaps for international adaptation of the call to arms of the World Heart Federation. So, as I say, the World Heart Federation identified the issue. The National Heart Foundation of Australia has responded with practical, evidence-based resources and guidance. I do want to thank the World Heart Federation for the collaboration that we've had in the creation of this document and also in preparing this event. I also want to thank Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia, who's helped by sponsoring this event, and Ralph Maddison will be joining us on one of the panels, and also Health and Wellbeing Queensland, one of the wonderful state-based institutions that there are which focus on prevention in a particular jurisdiction. Health and Wellbeing Queensland in Australia. I won't say it leads the way because that would be a very jurisdictionally specific and dangerous thing for me to say in Australia, but it's really good at what it does, and you'll hear from Robin Littlewood a little in a moment, their CEO. And to thank the clinicians and experts who gave us their guidance in the creation of this document. One thing that always surprises me about my job is that when I ask very, very busy, very expert people to give us their advice for free for a long time, they generally say yes, and we're very, very grateful for the support that they've given us. So thank you all again for coming. We're very privileged to be working with the World Heart Federation on this, and like you all, I'm looking forward to the discussion that happens from now on. Thank you.
Well, thank you both, David and Jagat, for those opening remarks and setting out the issue really very clearly for us this morning. The NHF and the WHF are leading the way in highlighting why action is needed on obesity. As David was just saying, last year the World Heart Federation's report on obesity and CVD called for a coordinated action right across health systems at country level. The NHF responded to that call, it convened that national stakeholder forum, and the result is the development of Australia's first clinical consensus statement on obesity and CVD, which is being launched today. I'm delighted to say we can now welcome, to talk about this launch, Gary Jennings, Chief Medical Advisor to the NHF, and Natalie Raffoul, Senior Manager of Healthcare Programmes and Clinical Strategy at the NHF. Give them a warm welcome, please.
Well, thank you very much, and I can only echo the background that Jagat has given us, and also David's thanks to so many people that have contributed to this. And while I'm doing that, there is a short video from one of our supporters, which I believe will come on now, before we get into the usual statement at this point is it worked when we tried it out. One more clip. Ah, that's Queensland.
Hello and good morning. I'm sorry that I could not join you in person for this year's summit, but I'm grateful that I can share a few words from where I am in Brisbane, Meanjin, on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara peoples, our Aboriginal traditional owners. Thank you to the World Heart Federation and our partners, the Heart Foundation of Australia, for their important work and for my invitation to speak today. This meeting provides a vital global platform to spotlight obesity as a central, yet often overlooked driver of CVD. It provides an opportunity to influence global health priorities, bring countries together to tackle obesity as part of heart health, and close the gap in how we coordinate care and policies across the world. This work matters, and I'm proud to stand with leaders and innovators from government, business, academia and community as we take on some of the biggest challenges in heart health today. At Health and Wellbeing Queensland, we are committed to improving the health of all by shifting the focus from treating illness to preventing it, supporting people, communities and systems to achieve better health outcomes across the lifespan. We focus on the key modifiable drivers of chronic disease: nutrition, physical activity, sleep and wellbeing, and we focus on those who need it the most, no matter who they are or where they live. At the same time, Health and Wellbeing Queensland is working towards strengthening the systems and environments that shape health, all at the same time in the most coordinated way. We understand that lasting, meaningful change for our communities can only be achieved through strong, trusted relationships. Partnerships are at the heart of everything we do. By working across all levels of government, health services, primary care, community organisations and in local settings, we ensure prevention is embedded where people live, learn, work and receive care, often without anyone knowing the effort that goes on behind the scenes. And there is no more important partnership than the one that we share with the Heart Foundation. That's why we are so proud to support David and his team in the release of the Obesity and Cardiovascular Disease Clinical Consensus Statement. This work aligns closely with our vision of creating a healthier Queensland by addressing the complex and interconnected factors that contribute to overweight, obesity and chronic disease. We know that overweight and obesity presents a significant global public health challenge. In Australia, 2 out of 3 Australian adults and 1 in 3 Australian children are living with overweight and obesity. We have to do better and more. We also know overweight and obesity is disproportionately impacting our most vulnerable, including First Nations people, those living in rural and remote communities, and those experiencing social economic disadvantage. These challenges are not just about individual behaviours. They are shaped by broader environmental, social and systemic factors. With the insights and guidance provided by this consensus statement, Health and Wellbeing Queensland can equip healthcare providers with the tools and resources that they need to effectively address overweight, obesity and heart disease, delivering sustainable long-term health outcomes for all. The Heart Foundation has been pivotal in advancing programs that promote heart health, reduce risk factors and support our communities, creating on-the-ground action to drive real change. Along with our own initiatives, our valued prevention partners are delivering programs that are making a measurable difference to the health and wellbeing of hundreds of thousands of Queenslanders, and we have the data to show it. Just one of our programs saw total hospital admissions reduced by 10%. The total number of people with at least one emergency department presentation reduced by 30%, and the number of people requiring at least one or more hospitalisations reduced by almost 40%. These are real results from people participating in one of our programs, people who had access to integrated care across specialist services, GPs and community organisations. This coordinated approach has made a tangible difference. By implementing a range of simple yet powerful responses, including physical activity, healthy schools programs and workforce wellbeing, we've demonstrated the transformative potential of stacking in prevention. Stacked intervention truly has the power to change lives, especially for those in beautiful regional and remote communities. We need something for everyone in a coordinated and supportive way. Healthy people are the foundation of strong, thriving communities, communities that can drive social, cultural and economic transformation. By bridging the gap between science, healthcare, policy and action, we can create a future where well-being is not just an aspiration, but a reality for all.
Well, we've had the scene set, I think, wonderfully for us. We've had the formalities. Let's get into the meat of what's actually within this this consensus statement. We'll be talking about the processes, because I think other countries may well be interested in following a similar pathway, and we're very happy for people to learn from our experiences. I'll talk a little bit about the recommendations as far as nutrition and physical activity is concerned, and then Natalie Raffoul I'll hand over, and she'll take you through the hot topic of pharmacotherapy, and particularly this rapidly developing area, recognising that this is a lifelong condition which needs lifelong care, and short, sharp interventions are not the answer. And we can't talk about this subject without dealing with equity and weight stigma. So I don't think I have to go take you through this. You understand, we've already heard why something like this is needed. This is rather specific. It very much complements a report from last year in the sense that clinicians are sort of beating down the door saying, we've got patients that are asking for all these new drugs. We've got people that are getting frustrated with not making progress on their weight control programs. We've got media about fad diets. We've got so much happening. We need some practical advice that'll help us in the clinic. So this is not, the statement itself is not dealing with the very important systemic issues which Jagat has talked about so well. It's dealing with what does a clinician do in primary care when a patient needs some help as far as their obesity control is concerned. Recognising this is a global audience, we also need to recognise that the trajectories in obesity vary around the world, and many of you would have seen the NCD risk paper in Nature last week, which really showed great variation around the world in where we are in development of rates of obesity. It's plateaued off in most high-income countries. But it's plateaued up at a dreadfully high level, and so it needs something as far as these interventions we'll be talking about done about it. In low-income countries, it's still accelerating, and it's accelerating at an alarming rate. And I think we've got to go upstream in that situation to help deal with making that trajectory change. So it's a community and a population level issue, but of course it has individual consequences, and we'll be talking about those in a minute. And recognising that over the last few decades, when these rates have reached such high levels, our genes haven't particularly changed, but our environment has, and that's going to be the second part of this. But in the meantime, I'll be talking about somebody with cardiovascular disease or at high risk of cardiovascular disease presenting to a clinician and what can be done with the here and now. The objective, as I said, is practical application, and this has been done, as I'll show you in a moment, using formal evidence review and using strength of evidence recommendations. So this is the evidence to start the conversations, whether it's with your regulatory authorities, whether it's with your clinicians, whether it's with the community, upon which any conversation like this about such a contentious issue should be based. This is the process, and I won't go through it all. It will be in the eventual document, which is presently online. You don't have hard copy. What you have is a summary of the recommendations. But if I could give you one bit of advice, if you want to embark on a path like this, the most important thing is to set up a task force, and then to get out of your comfort zone as far as a cardiovascular research or public health researcher is concerned, because obesity is something which is addressed from so many different perspectives, that the most important step I think we took was to have a national stakeholder forum and bring all the peak bodies, all the individual experts, all the groups, and they're very much in and out of the cardiovascular space, and then the evidence review, and then writing, etc., which is fairly routine. The other thing we learned a lot from was consultation, and I've already said that obesity is a somewhat contentious issue. When we centred this out for fairly targeted consultation, we got 900 bits of advice for us on the draft of the document. Most of all of which was constructive, but it just shows that everybody feels they've got a role in this space. Once again, to this audience, I don't need to say that obesity per se is an independent risk factor for cardiovascular disease, but it also exerts significant influence in an indirect sense through risk factors like obesity, dyslipidemia, diabetes, etc. And one thing they seem to have in common is endothelial dysfunction, inflammation, oxidative stress, insulin resistance, etc. They're very common kind of biomedical drivers to this. To the epidemiological consequences. So let's get on to some of the recommendations, and I think these are probably two of the most important. I think this audience would recognise obesity as a chronic systemic condition driven by excess adiposity. It's it's a disease, it's not an individual choice, and we have failed so far because we've focused so much on individual choices and not dealing with the environment and the consequences that has. And the second thing is we've used BMI as our primary screening tool, or suggested using that, largely because that's where the evidence comes from. That's where all the trials are. In all the trials, that's what's defined who goes in, who goes out, and some of the changes. But we recognise that it's a very highly flawed screening tool. People with a lot of muscle can have a high BMI without adiposity. People that are very thin can have adiposity in the wrong parts of the body, which can lead to consequences. So we've said use body mass index, but also take into account one of the other anthropometric measures, such as waist circumference, weight height ratio, waist hip ratio, etc. Next set of recommendations refer to nutrition. And remembering these are people with heart disease or at high risk of cardiovascular disease. So our focus as far as nutrition was concerned was more on a heart-healthy diet to try and modify some of those other risk factors that are involved in driving the consequences of obesity than in calorie or energy restriction. We have recommendations, the second and third one here, for calorie restriction, but they need to be tailored, they need to be culturally sensitive, they need to be appropriate to the individual's life habits and the availability of food, and they are short-term measures. They have, as we know, with all of the dietary interventions in obesity, for the most part, just about any diet works in the short term, but there are great problems in terms of sustainability. So there are recommendations about nutrition. The practical considerations I've talked about, prioritising cardiovascular risk factor, not just weight reduction, and we see benefits in people with obesity or who are overweight in improving their risk factors, even with interventions that don't affect their weight. And that applies to some of these nutritional interventions, perhaps also to some physical activity recommendations that were made. I've talked about individualising it, and where possible, and of course it's much easier in certain situations, use the expertise which is available through certified trained dietitians. We'll have different workforces in different parts of the world, but there are people that can very much support the primary care provider who may only have a few minutes to deal with a patient in terms of that individualisation. And then whatever sort of subsidisation of primary care services is available for chronic disease, you need to use that. Physical activity, again, we're recommending regular physical activity, of course. That's a motherhood statement. And there's the yin-yang between physical activity and sedentary lifestyle, and we need to address both sides of that if we're going to have an impact. It probably doesn't do much to weight the kind of physical activity programs that most people are likely to engage in, but it will improve their health outcomes substantially, as you all know. So we don't want them to get dispirited if their weight isn't changing as much as we hope. We want them to continue for all the very right reasons. And then the other thing that's emerged from the evidence is the role of not just aerobic exercise, the traditional sort of recommendations, but resistance exercise tailored to a person's abilities, goals, lifestyle, likes and dislikes is very important too. So the practical considerations I've talked about. The other particularly important use of resistance exercises in people taking incretins, where there's the possibility of losing muscle mass, to date, although there's a lot of things under development, the only thing we have is resistance exercise to counter that. And again, use exercise professionals if they're available, or use people that have got expertise in this area. And at that point, it's my pleasure to hand over to Natalie Raffoul to talk about the tricky bits, which is the pharmacotherapy and surgical interventions. Thank you, Nat.
Thank you very much, Gary. And it's understandable that our clinical consensus statement has a particular focus area on pharmacotherapy, hearing loud and clear clinicians who are in need of this guidance, but also because it is a very clinical-facing consensus statement. So one of our recommendations, and I just want to call out, in front of you, you'll have the detail of the summary of our recommendations if we don't go through them word by word today, and our algorithm document as well that will help guide you through the session. One of our recommendations is the use of obesity management medicines in conjunction with behavioural modification where weight-related health improvements have not been or cannot be attained with behavioural modifications alone. So we're taking a very stepped approach to the use of pharmacotherapy. The consensus statement then goes on to guide the choice or selection of medication according to different clinical profiles or groups of patients, particularly specific to cardiovascular disease. And the best way to illustrate that is to show you it in the management algorithm, which is concurrently published and launched at the same time as the consensus statement. As you can see, it provides a very practical way for us to work through the recommendations, and clinicians can use this from day one. You'll see that across the BMI spectrums in people with established cardiovascular disease, no matter what, physical activity and nutrition is the foundational management strategy for all. Again, in those people where weight-related health improvements could not be attained through behavioural modifications alone, we recommend the addition of pharmacotherapy. And here, we're really privileged to have a series of cardiovascular outcome trials to guide the choice of agent within particular groups. In type 2 diabetes, we're spoilt for choice. This is where a lot of our cardiovascular outcome trials originated. And here, based on what's also available in Australia, we have semaglutide, tirzepatide, and liraglutide, which are preferable in this group of patients given their reduction in MACE outcomes in the long term, in addition to managing weight. In people with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, we're guided by the landmark SELECT trial, which was the first in a non-diabetic population to show positive cardiovascular outcomes. And it's with the agent semaglutide, showing effectiveness in weight reduction, but also a 20% reduction in MACE over about 3.5 years. We expect the list of agents to grow in this box, particularly as more and more trials are published in the coming years. And acting on the early and emerging positive data in the area of heart failure, we've also provided a preferred recommendation for tirzepatide and semaglutide in heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, given their positive outcomes on quality of life, symptom control, and functional capacity. In the situation where behavioural modification and pharmacotherapy have been trialled together and weight-related health improvements have still not been attained, or the goal, weight-related health improvements have still not been attained, then the consensus statement recommends referral onto multidisciplinary specialised metabolic services, preferably ones that offer metabolic bariatric surgery. And I'll go through the recommendation for that in a moment. In this management algorithm, all roads lead to lifelong care and monitoring, as Gary mentioned earlier, with the need not only to monitor weight and the complications and everything to do with weight management, but also cardiovascular, metabolic risk factors, and ongoing mental health. Running vertically in our management algorithm, we have the emphasis that cardiovascular risk optimization is still critical in this group. The rules of secondary prevention apply, as these are individuals that are at very high cardiovascular risk. And that means controlling their blood pressure, their cholesterol, and adherence to statins, ACE inhibitors, and antiplatelets where relevant, because we know those will improve their long-term cardiovascular outcomes. I've covered this slide, but just a note to say that the use of incretin-based medicines is expanding really rapidly, looking at indications in sleep apnea, liver disease, and diabetic kidney disease, to name a few. Our clinical consensus statement offers up a huge suite of practical recommendations for clinicians to not only select the right agent, but also titrate it and manage it appropriately in their patients. And that starts by preparing your patients for long-term treatment, knowing that unfortunately weight regain is quite common upon discontinuation of these agents. We know that GI side effects are common. They were common in diabetes, and they're common in the use of with the use of these agents in obesity, and they can be mitigated by slow titration up. We also know that, as Gary mentioned, these incretins have been linked to significant muscle mass loss. The evidence is unclear about whether this is to do with this dramatic weight loss that you see with these agents, or whether it's class specific, and more research is needed in that. Adequate protein intake and resistance training can help mitigate these things. There are some rarer side effects with these medicines that have been observed: acute pancreatitis, gastroparesis, and GI obstruction, and patients should be counselled to look out for these potentially rare but serious side effects. And as these agents are used more and more post-market in the real world, we also see more safety signals come through. Suicidal ideation and some rarer optic neuropathies have been observed and flagged to differing degrees by international regulators. Of course, there is the theoretical risk that these agents will impact contraception, and through delayed gastric emptying, there may be a reduced absorption of oral contraceptions. And so the product label for tirzepatide recommends use of a non-oral contraception at the point of initiation of tirzepatide or at dosage escalation. I wish we had time to go through it, but our consensus statement flags the huge abundance of obesity medicines in the pipeline. This not only looks at GLP as the target, GIP, the double agonists that we have, but triple agonists that also target glucagon, completely new satiety pathways through amylin, combinations of the two, and oral formulations and more. So it's going to be a very exciting space. As mentioned, for people that are referred on to these multidisciplinary metabolic bariatric surgeries or services that provide these surgeries, we recommend that particularly for individuals where their BMI is above 40 or from 35, for individuals with a comorbid condition, metabolic bariatric surgery should be considered where relevant. And if that pathway is taken, then there's a whole suite of quite significant long-term monitoring that is required for these patients. Some of it's captured in pre-assessment, including their mental health and kind of lifestyle and behavioural modifications, but certainly after surgery, ongoing monitoring for nutritional deficiencies, weight regain, and complications of surgery is warranted. In the real world, our wonderful expert task force has advised us that often pharmacotherapy is used in combination with surgery, either before or after surgery, particularly for people with incredibly severe BMIs. Lifelong care, and I know we've mentioned it before, but just to point out that these individuals are not only to be monitored for their cardiometabolic, cardiovascular risk profile going forward, but also that early identification of CKM syndrome is critical. Being able to identify early, treat, and improve outcomes for this patient cohort is really important. And our primary care physicians in Australia are critical to tying all this together, whether it be before or after specialised referral. Equity is really important in our consensus statement. It's been weaved throughout our recommendations, and we call out our high priority populations in Australia, in particular our First Nations people, cold communities, and rural and remote communities. And we certainly flag that access issues to pharmacotherapy and surgery really risk exacerbating these inequities. We also, thanks to the guidance of several members with lived experience on our national task force, have called out the important role of weight stigma in managing obesity, and really the need for us to start acting on strategies to address weight stigma in our clinical practice and in public health urgently. I really warmly encourage you to visit, if you haven't already, the full clinical consensus statement online. We've published a suite of practical resources alongside the full clinical guidance so that it can be implemented from day one, from today. And I'd like to really just extend a huge thank you to all of the National Task Force members who guided this clinical statement, the hardworking project team at the Heart Foundation, and all teams who contributed, the University of Queensland for conducting the evidence review and environmental scan, and the hundreds of stakeholders who contributed to our consensus statement development and consultation, and of course the World Heart Federation for affording us this opportunity to present it. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Having said that, and thank you so much, Natalie. I mean, her enthusiasm and Gary's is really infectious, I think, here in the room. Does anybody actually have any? We do have time for some questions. Does anybody have any questions for excellent? In that case, Gary, Natalie, would you mind both coming and taking a seat, at least to be in comfort?
Good morning. Francesco Branca, Institute of Global Health, University of Geneva. Natalie, you mentioned long-term use of GLP-1 receptor agonist. I wonder if the panel has been looking at the long-term side effect. I'm particularly thinking of something that you didn't mention, which is sarcopenia, which might be associated to actually remarkable, important weight loss. And this might also be related to the recommendation about the extent, the daily extent of weight loss, because as you know, the combination of fat muscle depends on the extent of the calorie deficit. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I can start, and Gary, you want to jump in? Or?
Well, no, you can deal with it in detail, but I'm reminded of what Zhou Enlai said when he was asked about the French Revolution. It's a little bit too early to tell. I think the situation here is it's too early to tell. The SELECT trial, for example, which we're basing a lot of our recommendations on, median participation was about 3.5 to 4 years, so there may well be things down the track. You're right to draw attention to the potential of sarcopenia. The evidence so far is a little bit mixed, but
No,
Natalie
that's
can talk to that.
No, that's absolutely right, Gary. We looked into this in quite some detail because of the huge interest in this area. Yes, we need longer-term trials with the use of these agents for weight loss. They've been around for a long time in diabetes, but given particularly the double and now soon to be triple agonists producing that really significant weight loss, we need more data. And the evidence is unclear about whether it is class-specific, agent-specific, or just associated with that big drop in weight loss, which is often accompanied by a muscle mass loss.
And as you would know, there are products under development which have an incretin combined with a trophic molecule, and that might provide the answer to your question if they have any differential effects.
Would you allow me to add something to
Of
what
course.
you said? Okay. So the two other very important things here. Number one, that the combination of high protein diets with it and the strength training, that is one. The second important thing is the biggest investigational area today is looking at the MRI of the muscles, and they are now, what they are telling is whether it is the intercellular, intracellular, or the mitochondrial fat depositions, which are also being taken away by the GLPs and GIPs, and possibly with the glucagon also. So it might be doing a favor to your muscle by taking the fat away from the muscle. So it is, as they just said, that the jury is still out there. So, and we do not really know what exactly the impact is going to be. My feeling is that it is going to be a superior muscle rather than the sarcomeric loss.
So can I ask a question?
Of course.
There's a bit of confusion about the actions of GLP-1, GIP, because they're the ones which are commonly used now. But in terms of the behaviors, we have the hungry gut, we have the satiety, we have hedonistic eating. Not all of these are impacted by these. So how do we tackle some of these? Is there a role for precision nutrition or trials on precision, and how will it in the future look?
Yes, it's hard to talk about this walking past all the beautiful chocolate shops in Geneva, but absolutely. I think, compared to other areas of investigation, nutrition research is behind, and we need to progress that. And anybody that thinks there's a single fix for the obesity epidemic is just not in the right place. We need to always consider this as one of many interventions that need to be considered and implemented. Research too.
A quick follow-up question. 1/3 of patients don't respond, or people don't respond, or there's a treatment failure. So what do we do to them? And it's a big number.
It is.
Well, I think this is where multidisciplinary approaches and an integrated care is essential. There's no silver bullet as recommended in our consensus statement or any guideline for that matter. So having the complementary strategies for managing obesity are going to be really important. And it may be in that third that there are some behavioural, mental health or other nutritional impacts that are impacting the therapy, or there are other hopefully options for them, including surgical if they are meeting that criteria.
We have time for one more, I think.
Deakin from Vice President with the International Diabetes Federation. Good morning, and thank you so much. It is early in the morning, but it's an eye-opener to listen to all of you, and our presence here is the best proof of it. So I was glad to hear diabetes once or twice. I would have liked to hear it more, because it's, how much it is related to obesity, to CVDs, and so many other. They are very much interconnected. I'm very happy that we do collaborate. And last year I was sitting up there talking also about this. I have a non-specialist question, and I would like you to clarify this, because I hear people worried about losing muscle. But then my logic says, if I have less weight, don't I need less muscle mass? So if you could clarify this for a non-specialist, it would make my life easier responding to some questions outside clinic work. I'm not a clinician, so just to clarify the source of this. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think the issue is whether there's disproportionate muscle mass. As you say, if you reduce weight, you may well reduce the weight of all tissues in the body, but if it's disproportionate, that's something we're concerned about. Secondly, if we haven't mentioned diabetes, I'm sorry, because we learn so much from the world of diabetes. We wouldn't be where we are without diabetes research. And thirdly, there's obesity, and there's obesity with metabolic complications, particularly insulin resistance and diabetes. And the second group are the ones that have the cardiovascular complications. So the consensus statement itself very much emphasises the fact that obesity is rarely a sole traveller.
All right. We are going to have to leave it there for the moment. I know there's probably loads more questions you've got for Gary and Natalie, but please give them a round of applause. So many topics for discussion with our expert panel. I'd like to invite them to come up and join me now, if that is possible. Oh. Yes, we'll move. We'll do a little bit of manoeuvring, I think.
Hi, I'm Chiara. Yeah. Hello, Sprite. Oops. I think
maybe I can.
As long as
It's a mix.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
yeah.
Mixed by gender, perfect.
There we go. Lovely.
I just need
Whatever you like.
to be sure that I'm not going to fall. I move a lot, like a good Italian.
Oh, okay.
It is being filmed. That would be the YouTube hit. So please do it.
It will be
I
memorable.
think we've got one more coming.
Water?
Thank you.
It was great, wasn't it?
For you?
Super sparkling.
It's fine.
Ah.
I drink both.
Ellen doesn't have a mic. Just saying Ellen doesn't have a mic at the moment. Okay.
Oh.
Come up a little bit forward. Yeah. We're just waiting for one more. Welcome, Ralph. No, no worries.
Just getting kicked up.
Yes, take a seat.
Thanks.
I mean, what a wonderful presentation there by Natalie and Gary. We have a lot to talk about. An expert panel with us. I think for ease of brevity, I'm going to get you to introduce yourself. So perhaps we could start right at the very
Yes, I'm Chiara Maria Chiara di Cesare. I'm director of the Institute of Public Health and Wellbeing at University of Essex, and I was co-leading author for the World Heart Federation Report 2025.
My name is Lars Hartenstein. I'm a co-founder of McKinsey Health Institute, which is an independent institute looking at underinvested areas of health, including metabolic health.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Luz Maria de Regil. I'm the director of the Department of Nutrition and Food Safety, responsible for many of the policies that we are going to be discussing today.
Good morning. My name is Prabhakaran Dorairaj. I'm executive director at the Center for Chronic Disease Control, New Delhi, India, and I'm also the president-elect of the World Heart Federation.
My name is Ellen Crushell. I'm a Deputy Chief Medical Officer at the Department of Health in Ireland and representing the Minister for Health in Ireland.
My name is Ralph Madison. I'm a Professor of Physical Activity and Disease Prevention at the Institute for Physical Activity and Nutrition at Deakin University in Australia, and my research really focuses around the promotion of physical activity and healthy lifestyles, mainly in people with cardiovascular disease, with a focus more on digital health.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us, panel. I think, Maria Chiara, I think we'll start with you and talk a little bit. We heard about it earlier in one of the presentations about the World Heart Report 2025. In your opinion, what are the most concerning trends linking obesity and cardiovascular disease right around the globe?
Yeah, so I think that Jagat already gave a good flavor of the size of the problem globally. So 1 billion people are living currently with obesity, and this includes 900 million, almost 900 million of adults, and the remaining are children and adolescents. And this is 4 times more than what we had in 1990. So in essentially 4 decades, with just 4 times more people living with obesity. And we are talking about around 14% of men, 18% of women in the world, and 6% for children and adolescents. So it's a very large proportion. And but those proportion is like the global. The global estimates hide what is happening at national level, and what is happening at national level is hiding what is happening at subnational level. So we have range of level of obesity, prevalence of obesity that go from 80% in Pacific Island to 2% in sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that Jagat and also Gary, you mentioned that the paper that came out very recently about pace of change, and the worrying things is that fast pace that we are observing in low and middle income countries. And there you have 2 things. One is that there is this fast pace, but it's also a population aspect that is the area of the world that is growing, right? So we will expect this to grow more over time. The link with cardiovascular diseases. So the report we highlighted how high BMI is linked to around 4 million deaths, half of which are due to cardiovascular diseases. And these were the data from the Global Burden of Disease. Just checked the new estimates, and they are pretty much the same figure. And so I think that there are a lot also of diversity or differences across subgroups of the population. So whether this is by gender or whether this is by socioeconomic status or geographical, so urban versus rural. So there are studies that have shown that the rural increase in BMI is what is contributing the most to the global rise in obesity. So I think that for me it is a combination of these prevalences that are increasing and the population growth, and where that growth is observed in which area of the world. I'll stop here so that we allow others, because it's a lot of number to digest. So it's
some staggering figures that you've just told there. I mean, Lars, from a health systems and economic perspective, what do you think is the true cost of inaction on obesity as a driver of CVD?
So now that you asked me about the economic impact, I need to throw around some other numbers.
That's okay. We can take them in.
So So according to our estimates, the value at stake economically is about $3 trillion of GDP by 2050, just for obesity. Those are staggering numbers. So, but I think it's important in this context, we are going from heart disease, if you want, upstream to obesity. If we really look at obesity and metabolic health, because obesity is the consequence of ill metabolic health. If we kept everybody metabolically healthy to begin with, the value at stake, there would be $6 trillion of GDP, so even double. So I would say I encourage, and from an economic perspective, to continuously go upstream and see what we can do to keep everybody metabolically healthy in the first place, because then we would really have an enormous economic value added and also, of course, increase the burden enormously for health systems.
And he is passionate, I know, because I've been reading up about you, absolutely passionate about metabolic health, aren't you?
I'm very passionate about metabolic health. What do you want me to say? Yes.
Yeah, no. I was reading up.
What I just said is really what I truly believe in, that can we use this moment through these new drugs that has opened up a discussion and is opening up discussion to really follow up the trail of innovation and do more about treating obesity, and that is a great thing. But can we go even further and be more ambitious and go towards a veritable metabolic health revolution where we go back and relearn what we knew as humanity a couple of decades ago, which is how to be metabolically healthy in the first place. But anyway, maybe we get to that later.
I think indeed we're going to talk a little bit more about drugs, and particularly as they were raised in the consensus later in the panel. Let's look at it from the WHO perspective, Luz. What are the most critical system-level policy levers that countries are currently underutilising when it comes to addressing obesity as a driver of cardiovascular disease, do you think?
I think that countries are underutilizing all policies, to be honest. I think that this topic has been neglected in many ways. And now, I don't know if you can hear me. Yeah. And now is when we are trying to put all the pieces together. There has been a history, and WHO has been working over the last 10, 15 years on policies to improve the food environments. And the statement also includes that. Currently, and I don't have exact numbers, but we have more than 50 countries that have front of the package labeling, for example. More than 100 countries that have some policies for healthy food procurement, which is using the purchasing power of governments to procure healthier food and distribute it to the public systems. We have countries now, 30 plus, that are taking a big bet in preventing harmful marketing, particularly in schools. What we see now, and of course now we have this very big attention to the health systems and the responsibility that the health system has to provide better and integrated care. What is missing is doing everything together. We see that very few countries actually have a food environment policy that is addressing the different areas. They have one policy here, but not addressing all the population groups. And of course, if we go with one policy here and there, it sounds good, but the effects are very, very limited. And likewise, if we only focus on the food environment, but we don't address the health system part, and also the overall environment, like physical activity, then we are just patching here and there. And the food offer is really high, it's everywhere. The opportunities for lack of physical activity are also millions. So what is missing is coordinated action across different sectors with policies that are actually working. And for some policymakers, actually making the decision to fight the fight. Because the quality of the policies is also not as good as we would like. For example, everyone makes a lot of noise, and we have to celebrate in some ways that there is progress on fiscal policies for sweetened beverages. But the quality of those policies is very, very limited. It's only, on average, I think, on the median, it's only increasing the price of those beverages by 2%. That leads to almost nothing. It just sounds good, but the effectiveness is very limited. So what is missing is coherence, integration, and a coordinated action across systems.
Well, let's ask Prabhakaran the big question then. So what does a truly integrated care model look like in practice, bringing together diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular disease?
I think it's one of the most difficult questions to answer.
I'm so sorry.
Someone had to take it.
The reason is because what is a health system? Is a health system a center for treating people with illness, or a center which maintains the wellness of individuals? I will leave the wellness component to the policymakers because it is rooted in social determinants. But when you look at integrated care, it has to be patient-centered, number one. Number two, it has to have a life course approach. Number three, it should have emphasis on continuum of care. Number four, it should take away all the fragments and get a coordinated way of providing easy path to a patient when the patient comes to the hospital. Just to give an example, patient comes, goes to the billing center, then is referred to a doctor. A doctor sees the patient, oh, you have hypertension, you have diabetes, go and see a cardiologist, go and see an endocrinologist, go and see a nephrologist. So I think we need to root it in primary care, where the primary care physician is empowered, both in terms of training as well as in terms of enabled technology, which eases. Now we have so many devices, there's so many solutions, AI-based solutions, machine learning, all those things. So can we reimagine and redesign healthcare that looks at the patient as a whole and not patient as a combination of diseases? I think that is what integrated, it's a philosophical thinking. Second is involvement of families. We somehow ignore families and we say, okay, this person has hypertension, he has to reduce salt, or she has to reduce salt, she has diabetes, modify the diet. How do you expect a patient to starve in a milieu of plenty? So we need to integrate that into the family thinking. I think these are two major things. One for behavior change. I mean, I can talk endlessly. One for behavior change and one at the level of the systems. So patient-centered approach, involvement of families. I think these two are very important.
All right. What a great answer that was. Well done, Prabhakaran, for the big question. Ellen, one of the ambitions of the EU Safe Hearts plan is to strengthen prevention and early detection. What opportunities do you see for integrating obesity risk assessment and management more effectively into primary care and cardiovascular pathways across EU countries, which is your speciality?
Yeah. So I suppose, like, Ireland reflects the global burden of obesity. 27% of our adults live with obesity, and 1 in 5 of our children are overweight. And similarly, our cardiovascular burden is huge. We have almost 10,000 deaths every year from cardiovascular disease. So from Ireland's perspective, we really welcome the Safe Hearts ambition to strengthen prevention, early risk identification, and to embed obesity as a chronic disease management pathways. And of course, with that equity at the core. So the obesity, I suppose, just to tell you a little bit about what we're doing in Ireland, which reflects much of what's happening in the Safe Hearts plan, which I suppose gives us a great framework and gives EU countries a nice framework to work from. In Ireland, we have embedded chronic disease management programme in our primary care. We are undergoing major reform in the last few years. And already we're starting to see, so primary care is incentivised to identify patients with chronic disease, and that includes type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. At present, obesity is considered a risk factor, so if you and there are opportunistic case finding opportunities, so if you identify a patient who's in for something else, you think they're a little overweight, they go on to a financed pathway then for risk for risk management, and that includes an annual visit with the GP nurse, an annual visit with the GP. And then if you move on to the chronic disease, you get biannual visits from both the GP nurse and the GP. We're already seeing benefits. It's been running now for a couple of years. So those cohorts that have passed their third visit on the chronic disease are seeing measurable benefits in their cardiovascular risk factors, including obesity measures and cholesterol, for example. So that program is starting off. I mean, a huge investment has gone into it, and that's been absolutely essential. So it aligns with the wider health system approach that we're taking, which is trying to push care to the left and give the right care at the right place. So it's been a nationwide process, but this particular part of it is starting to show benefits, which is really helpful. In terms of prevention, we have a quite strong clinical leadership in the obesity space in Ireland, and we're just finishing our first strategy and developing another one, and that's going to have a real focus on prevention, particularly for children. I mean, interested to hear you talk about families. My background is I'm a pediatrician, so this is really at the core of our work, where you can identify that child who's at risk of obesity, before they're even born. If you're overweight parents, you're far more likely to become overweight. If you live in a certain area, we know that the obesity rates from disadvantaged schools are much higher than those in advantaged areas. So you can predetermine which children you need to be looking out for, and I think we need to now start looking at that, because our chronic disease management program is only from 18 up. So I think we need to start looking at mums who are overweight, and ensuring our breastfeeding rates are not as good as in other countries in Europe. So that's a big focus for us, because we do know that breastfeeding is preventive. So I suppose that's what's happening in Ireland. The equity question is obviously huge, and that's been referred to. Obviously, it's core to the Australian work as well, and similarly, it's one of our main drivers for our national policies. So we very much welcome the Safe Hearts plan to help us continue to drive that forward and to look at systems change. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Ralph, your expertise is obviously in things like behavioural change, and we've alluded to it a little bit earlier. Digital tools are often presented as a solution, or at least part of the solution. Where do they genuinely add value, do you think? And is there a danger that we're overhyping their impacts on behavioural change?
Yes, I think digital tools are useful, and I think we need to understand that digital tools are very broad. You can go from very simple interventions like SMS to e-health to more mobile health tools, which includes wearables and sensors, etc. And I agree that they're not a silver bullet, and they need to be considered in conjunction with other system-level change, etc. But there is good evidence to support digital interventions, particularly in people with cardiovascular disease, around modification of risk factors, but also in terms of cardiovascular outcomes. So I think in this context, I think there's increasing evidence around their benefit. And I think in terms of increasing, what we're going to start seeing is more wearables and more sensor-based technologies, which allows us to deliver more precision-based interventions for people. And I think with the advent of AI, and we're going to see a lot more of that change. But I think even at a very simple level, there's evidence of text messaging interventions, for example, supporting people with cardiovascular disease or at risk of cardiovascular disease. The Heart Foundation have the Text to Detect program, which is shown to improve people's risk identification and going for risk assessments. There's programs in Australia that have looked at interventions. We've our own Heart and Text for Heart, the Text Me study. There's been a lot of very, very simple interventions, and increasingly there's telehealth interventions being shown. I think in terms of scalability, though, where we haven't really seen is true scalability of these interventions. And I'm not talking about app-based products that are commercially available. I'm talking about evidence-based, theory-based programs that include things like self-monitoring, feedback, goal setting built into them. So there are evidence of scalable interventions. The WHO and the ITU have their Be Healthy, Be Mobile toolkits, and those toolkits are designed to support governments to deliver interventions at scale, and what are the things that they need to do that. The more we move to that sort of model, then I think we're going to see less of the hype and more about true implementation.
I want to actually open this up to the panel, because we saw it in the consensus statement, and quite a lot was made of it, and obviously it's what everybody's talking about, but the obesity management drugs. Does anybody actually want to have an opinion on them, about how they become part of an integrated care package? Any thoughts from any one of you? I'm just opening it up. Deathly silence.
I can take it. And WHO released a guideline at the end of last year on the use of these therapies for the management of obesity. And there is little more to add to what it has been said. WHO released a conditional recommendation, which means for the use of these medications as part of obesity treatment. And that means that policymakers or clinicians, in many of the cases, the benefits outweigh the harms. Still, we are learning about the potential benefits and the harms in the longer term, because for obesity treatment particularly, there is not enough evidence in the long term. And also, we have more evidence from semaglutide coming from the diabetes world. But as we heard, there are new medications that are coming in this class that we don't know. There is not enough evidence. We know that they are effective for weight loss, and probably that mediates some benefits on cardiovascular disease. We don't know if there are independent benefits as well. So WHO is observing how it's moving forward, the evidence, again, on benefits and harms. And benefits can be also on mental health and other dimensions. But also looking at encouraging countries to have a better monitoring of side effects. And as we have moved forward, even as we were developing the guideline, we learned about other rare side events that came and were considered by the panel. So this is a living guideline, which means that we are reviewing the evidence, and whenever there is enough evidence to change the strength of the recommendation or the direction at some point, possibly, WHO will be ready to do that. However, it's important to say that these medications indeed have changed the conversation. And in many places, we hear a big demand from countries to get not only clarity on the efficacy and trade-offs in terms of health outcomes, but whether they can be implemented. So we know that regulation in many countries, many of these medications are registered in more than 60 countries. And some of these medications, like semaglutide, became generic in the patent expired early this year in April, and now they are generic. So what we anticipate is that it's going to be even more production of these medications. So we work with the essential medicines list. We are working to also make sure that there are not, the right as generics move forward, there is also quality and pre-qualified producers and manufacturers. Is very, very important, because of course obesity as not as a disease, but maybe as a condition or as a desire, may be driving this need. And our position is very clear. It's not the first line of treatment in many ways. Obesity, and we welcome the algorithm that was presented today. It's a disease that has a big toolkit, and patients need to go through this toolkit until reaching the medication. And behavior change is important, support is important, having coordinated services is important, so making the journeys, the patient's journey less difficult, let's put it in this way. And what we see is that the health workforce is not ready. So again, this guideline gives us the opportunity to intensify the training and the message for the workforce to be able to address obesity in these populations. And I just, if you allow me, will make two things. We don't have enough, we are going to release soon guidelines for the treatment of obesity in children and adolescents. And it's important that we differentiate this, because GLP-1 at this point is the guidelines for adults. However, as we heard, between 10 and 15% of the population, adults, and adolescents and children, are with overweight and obesity. And health services are not ready. Pediatricians are not ready to provide a different type of intervention. So the guidelines that I hope that are going to be released in a couple of months have statements or recommendations on screen time, physical activity, behavior change, other dietary recommendations or interventions. And of course, always complemented with policies for the food environment. So I hope that that helps. So GEP medications are part of the toolkit, but I think that the clinical community needs to go step by step, even when providing a individual clinical advice to patients.
Okay, well, we look forward to the guidelines. Lars, you want to come in?
Yeah, of course, I'm not going to add anything from a clinical perspective to WHO now, but we would not be sitting here without this drug class. Yeah? So that it has, as you said, changed the conversation. Investment and leadership is coming into a space, and a topic that was discussed in global health circles narrowly is now a broader topic in society. That's a remarkable achievement, and it is from what we know now, it's a very good drug class. At the same time, it's very important that it's not a silver bullet. And the perception out there is it is. And so I think what's important is to steer against that and really see how we can use this enormous attention that is now there to have the real discussion. And the real discussion is, how does one stay metabolically healthy in the first place? And at the moment, the attention follows this new intervention relatively narrowly, and it's very important to broaden it as much as we can and try to have the real conversation.
And it has opened a conversation. We talked earlier about stigma. I wonder whether the fact that this conversation has been opened up has gone some way to alleviate the stigma around people with obesity. Anybody?
So I don't have the latest data on this, but there are definitely countervailing factors. So this is not based on empirical evidence, but I read and I believe it that in certain environments where it's now possible, let's say, to be thin, that now being muscular is the next thing. So thereby even increasing stigma in some ways. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think it's very problematic, but maybe there's others that can comment on that more competently.
I don't know whether more competently, but I think it's changing the narrative around obesity. I think, the example that I tend to give is like with hypertension. No one is judging someone that takes some antihypertensive, but there is this change also in the language around obesity and GLP-1. So I think it's changing the narrative, and probably there is still to go, but yes, it's something that is coming.
Prabhakaran, what do you think right now are the main barriers to implementing the integrated cardiometabolic care at primary care level that we were talking about earlier, particularly in low and middle income countries? What are the big barriers right now?
The biggest barrier obviously is the fragmented care, the access to care, because even now people in rural areas in many parts of Africa and India have to travel almost a day to just get a consultation. So that's access to care. Availability, supply chain issues in terms of drug availability, and when you do qualitative research in many communities and ask them, if you have to go to a primary healthcare center, what is that one thing that you want? Most people say drugs should be available, and I go, they should give me the drugs. And that's not happening because stockouts are very frequent. So that's the third. The fourth, of course, competing priorities. The unfinished agenda of the pre-transitional diseases like infectious diseases, nutritional diseases, and childhood diseases and others. So they are grappling with multiple other problems. And of course, social determinants are a huge issue. So there are several competing priorities. So the suggestion has been, everybody is suggesting team-based care. Now what is team-based care? So everybody is involved in the care. But the hierarchical structures in the health systems impede team-based care. To me, a physician who's at the apex of the team-based care is only first among equals. But it doesn't happen that way. He or she is the notional head, and there is an inherent hierarchy. Any organizational structure has inherent hierarchy. And we also ignore the concept of systems biology, where there is interaction amongst the individuals and groups. Like in biology, we have the same kind of interactions, which was identified in 19th century, and we have not overcome that still. So there are multiple such things which we need to look at, but we have made we have made a start, and technology is a great enabler for team-based care. Digital health is a great enabler for team-based care. Improving access, telemedicine is a great enabler. So we have systems now by which you can actually give personalized care. We need to reimagine health system. We need to go and give the drugs. There's a program called Makkalai Thedi Marutvam in Tamil Nadu, which essentially means medicine in search of patients. So they go to the houses and deliver the medicines. This comes from our earlier thing with polio. Eradication of polio was based on pulse polio vaccination, which was given at homes. So similar to that, NCD care is being redesigned. So I think you require a lot of imagination, a lot of thinking in terms of overcoming these barriers.
I've got so many more questions, but I know we're running out of time, and I really wanted to open it to the audience. Does anybody have a question for anyone in the panel, just a general observation?
Hi, Julie Redfern from Australia.
Hey.
So really nice to be here. I'm from Bond University and the University of Sydney. I guess the word inflammation is something that's coming to my mind, because I think there's that not only the obesity side of the GLP-1 medications, but also the potential to reduce inflammation. So I just wondered if anyone wanted to comment on that.
I think it's part of the system. I mean, with these drugs, you also reduce, you're talking about inflammation, right?
Yeah.
So once you reduce the fat in the body, your inflammation automatically comes down. So fat is the biggest source of inflammation, apart from infections, of course. So once you control that, it definitely brings down. One of the things that you did not ask, and I think that's an important concept, is the issue of comorbid conditions, the multiple long-term conditions. When we talk about multiple long-term conditions, the Americans talk about the CKMS, but I think there are two important areas that are neglected. When we have treatment with GLP agonists, we say there's a lot of gastrointestinal symptoms, reflux and things like that. Is it the side effect of the drug, or is it the cause? Because obesity itself can cause. So that's a multimorbidity for obesity. Osteoarthritis, it's bidirectional. Obesity increases osteoarthritis, and osteoarthritis prevents exercise. So we need to really expand this multimorbidity concept if you have to tackle obesity, apart from the drugs alone.
Anybody else? If not, it's one from me.
Sorry to take the floor again, but I'd like to perhaps make a point that, we're talking about the revolution of the GLP-1 receptor agonist, but there's an element that is also in the guidelines, which is the multimodal treatment. So where's the diet and where's the physical activity? And I believe that the quality of interventions, the data interventions, are inaccurate. Capacity of health workers to deliver those interventions, methodologies to deliver those interventions, different theories, from high fat to high carbohydrates, different, not necessarily grounded in science recommendations, plus, as Luz was saying, an environment which is playing against us. I wish the World Heart Federation could speak more strongly about the quality of that intervention. That no GLP-1 receptor agonist would work unless there is an accurate dietary interventions to minimize side effects, to accompany a transition. GLP-1 receptor agonist should be a boost towards healthy lifestyle and metabolic health.
Anybody want to respond to that?
I just want to add to this. I just wanted to give you a catchy phrase. There are 3 E's if you have to tackle obesity. Energetic profession, like what we have, an empowered community, and enthusiastic polity.
I suppose just to add to that, that's a wonderful thing. But I think you're absolutely right. We need to be, society needs to change. We're obesogenic, and our new strategy is cross-governmental. So transport's involved. All of the sectors are involved to try and change that whole systemic thing. Norway and Portugal have had great success in terms of advancing, the marketing unhealthy foods at kids, that, that should all change. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Thank you. Thank you. I will wear my hat of global advocate. We are usually called the troublemakers in the room. That's what they called me yesterday. I'm going to make honor to that by, first of all, thanking all of you for the valuable information, thanking you for mentioning stigma. But that, I don't think, is enough. It's a bit of a start, but a very shy one. I would like to kindly call upon all of you specialists to use more of a proper language. Forget for a bit your science, put it on the side, and remember at every time, especially here, here in Geneva, on what will be happening this week, so many people living with NCDs, metabolic issues, heart, CVDs, diabetes, whatever. We don't call by the name a person living with CVD. Why should we say diabetic? That's labeling the person. So the language, the narrative, thank you for mentioning that, is not something we should be talking about. It's something we should be implementing in our talk. And it's not a patient-centered approach that we are seeking. It's a people-centered approach. Apologies for saying it, but I say it with all my heart. And because I have a responsibility invested on me by every person living with an NCD in the world. And I have to mention, so you understand where this is stemming from, I'm a mother of a daughter living with type 1 diabetes. And I know how much a word in the whole speech can affect them, either positively or negatively. And then the end result we are seeking of well-being cannot be achieved unless we remember the person we are addressing. So this is a call to implement the narrative change in your distinguished talks, and very valuable, of course. But please remember at every second, it's not only science. And what is science? It's about the people living with those diseases. So this is something I would kindly ask all of you to always remember. And my comment or question to you all, a key word, equity. All of you are mentioning equity. I come from a low middle income country. I come from Lebanon. How do you work towards equity in a country who is facing survival every day? That would be my question. Thank you.
And that's a tough one. Would anybody like to pick up on that? I mean, no, you can, Liz.
I mean, I think that's working in fragile settings is very, very challenging. However, I mean, that's the mission of WHO, is trying to make sure that even in fragile states or situations, everyone has access to care. That we don't forget in the conversation to bring those points. That if there is any type of investment or any type of possibility of training the workforce, we do it. That we bring the agendas of migration, NCDs, conflict together, because it is, again, it's about people that are moving and are living with those conditions. So yeah, that's the mission of WHO, ensuring that the most vulnerable have the best chance to have a better care.
So with regard to your people-centered approach, I just wanted to say that's a Freudian slip. I'm a doctor, so I'm seeing patients, so it's a Freudian slip. I fully agree with you that it has to be people-centered approach. And there is another mistake which I made. I called multimorbidity. The word multimorbidity is no longer used by patients. Patients don't like it. They would like to call them to have people with multiple long-term conditions. So we are changing the narrative. It's a slow process, hardwired to.
and just on this point, in the report last year, we made we split the public health and clinical recommendation. In the public health recommendation, we refer to stigma and first-person language but yeah, it's totally, I totally agree. And if it has gone through something, I apologize.
Oh, not to me.
No, to everyone, not to you, to everyone. But yes, it's one of our recommendations is to switch and to really embed this first-person language into the...
And it sounds like things are changing on that front across the board. We really are running out of time. I've got a question, and I want to look to the future and on something positive as well. I'm opening up to the panel. It was fantastic to see the consensus statement earlier that Australia's got all its stakeholders together to come up with this. To what extent do you think that could be implemented as almost a template across other countries? And is that likely to happen? Can you see it moving forward, that countries are going to have that more integrated care pathway around obesity, around cardiovascular disease, and then come together?
I think it's a fantastic initiative, and I think it's a really good place as a template for other places, other countries. I suppose I know really like someone talked about the algorithm before. I think it's a fantastic place to start and to really provide guidance. I suppose from a physical activity and dietary perspective, I don't want to see those things being given lip service to. I think it's really important that those behaviour change elements are really considered integral before medication or prescribing GLP-1s are initiated, or even surgery. And I feel that often in these stories, because of maybe the evidence or maybe because of the conduct, those things are mentioned, but they're not given true credence. And I think that's really, really important. So I commend the fact that it was built in there. I just hope that the investment, that's maybe all the interest that's being brought along by GLP-1s, also pushes the interest in ensuring that these other factors, behaviour change, lifestyle change, is also considered important in this as well.
Anybody else?
So I think one thing I found really inspirational is how the change was being brought about, so that there was a central kind of set goal or an objective, then this multi-stakeholder convening, and then a method for follow-through. And that also we have seen in other places, that while the content focus may have been slightly different, but this kind of way to expand also the group of those are involved beyond, let's say, a narrow set of clinicians also is enormously powerful, and I think the way to go in NCDs, and I think that I found very inspirational.
So I think the most important thing that we need is, apart from we are very euphoric about the new drugs, they are very, very effective, but I think we should not forget behavior change, and we need very simplified communication. For example, we are not talking about portion size, and that's the most important thing that needs to change. And in a sense, big leaders, great leaders in the world, became leaders because they were able to communicate. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "There is enough in the world for every man's need, not for every man's greed." And that's the kind of narrative that we want, that, just reduce that half a spoon, 1 cup of rice, or reduce one of your bread, a small portion, which doesn't make you hungry. That's actually sufficient. If you look at the history of eating, before the Industrial Revolution, on an average, the world consumed 1,400 to 1,600 calories. At the turn of the 20th century, it rose to 1,800 calories. 1950s and 60s, it was 2,000 calories. At the turn of this century, it rose to around 2,800. Currently, it's around 3,000. Look at the increase in the calories. And that's one of the fuels which is driving the obesity, which we're ignoring.
Just my positive note is that 2 days ago we launched the new report of the World Heart Federation, and today I'm here with this amazing work that emerged or was coming after that last year report. So in my view, we are all pushing in the same direction. And if every year we could be the year after somewhere, so on such an actionable translation of a global report, I think we are really going in the right direction.
I think that's a very good way to end. I'm going to ask for a round of applause in a minute, because I've just got a couple of pieces of housekeeping for you. So WHF has 2 other events coming up. 12 o'clock today, so not long to wait. It is Closing the Gap in Cardiovascular Health, delivering prevention through national plans, primary care and integrated action. And then at 12 o'clock tomorrow, it's Women and Cardiovascular Disease, closing the research, awareness and care gap. So if you have a chance, please do go along to those. And I think we can possibly put up a QR code. Are we going to have the QR code come up any minute now? It's very exciting, this. You all want to know now what the QR code is, which is good. There we go. Right. So as we've all been... Otherwise we'll have a pretty picture. Yeah, a pretty picture of Ellen. So we've been talking about it, physical activity, a critical component of the response to obesity and cardiovascular disease. So if you scan that QR code, you can access the World Heart Federation's Q&A document on physical activity. It's practical, accessible, designed to help you better understand the evidence, recommendations, and key questions around physical activity and heart health. So I am going to do that straight off the back of this. In the meantime, I'd really like to thank my panel for answering all our questions and really giving us some insight and some positivity, hopefully, going forward. Thank you.
We are not